I'm not going to comment on speculation regarding that matter. However, this isn't speculation, it's a direct question to the Chancellor, who is fully aware of the decisions being made. 7 months into the role, you've now acknowledged the need for swift and decisive action. Does that mean you were too slow in the beginning? Would you admit to that? Rachel Reeves just faced a complete collapse on live television, struggling to justify a so-called hidden financial gap. But what was uncovered is even more damning. Once you see her reaction, you'll understand why Labour is scrambling to control the damage. I've gone through that report, as have many others, and nowhere does it mention a £22 billion deficit. The only numerical reference appears on page 2, specifically in Table 1. Even the Treasury's own assessment could only identify figures adding up to £9.5 billion. The Office for Budget Responsibility itself states that it is impossible to determine how much of that might have been realised. So, when the Chancellor claimed there was a £22 billion deficit, the latest OBR report has now proven that to be untrue. Will she take responsibility and apologise? Imagine one of the UK's top politicians completely unravelling on live TV, exposing cracks in the government's economic strategy for all to see. That's exactly what happened when Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, found herself struggling in an interview that quickly spiralled into disaster. What went wrong? Why was she unable to defend her position? Let's break down the interview that has everyone talking. Before the last UK election, Rachel Reeves made a clear and firm promise: no tax increases on hardworking citizens. Now, under scrutiny, that pledge is being tested, and it's not holding up well. I don't need to become Chancellor to understand the mess this government has made of public finances and public services, Reeves stated. The tax burden is at its highest level in 70 years. We don't need higher taxes, we need economic growth. I have no plans to raise any taxes beyond those we have already outlined. Yet, what happened? A record-breaking £40 billion tax increase, the largest in decades. But who bore the brunt of it? Not the wealthiest, not major corporations, but the middle class. Increased income tax, higher VAT, and rising council taxes all hit ordinary families the hardest. When confronted about this broken promise on Sky News, her response was shocking. Instead of taking accountability, she shifted blame to the previous government, claiming she had inherited a £22 billion deficit from her predecessors. According to Reeves, the tax hike was necessary to stabilise public finances and correct the Conservatives' mismanagement. You specifically stated that you already knew everything necessary, the interviewer pressed. Yet, on Wednesday, you raised taxes by £40 billion. Why should the public believe anything you say going forward? Reeves backtracked: I was mistaken on June 11th. When I arrived at the Treasury on July 5th, senior officials laid out the true scale of the financial crisis. The previous government had concealed the full extent of the deficit from the country, from Parliament, and even from the Office for Budget Responsibility. When I delivered the budget, I had to take decisive steps to restore stability, but the arithmetic simply doesn't add up. Even by the most extravagant interpretations, the numbers don't match the drastic measures Reeves implemented. As scrutiny intensified, her composure faltered. She hesitated, her voice wavered, and she struggled to defend even the most basic aspects of her budget. This wasn't just a bad interview, it was confirmation of the public's worst suspicions. And if you think tax hikes were the worst of it, just wait until you hear about her plans for pensioners. When pressed about previous votes supporting national insurance cuts, Reeves deflected, insisting those cuts were originally justified based on misleading information. The premise was that funding was available, she argued. We now know it wasn't, due to the £22 billion black hole. Yet, before the election, Reeves had strongly opposed those cuts, arguing they were unsustainable. Now, she claims they were justifiable at the time, until the numbers didn't add up. When confronted about this glaring contradiction, she shifted the blame once again, insisting she had been misled. The revelation of this hidden deficit has led to sweeping fiscal changes, including slashing winter fuel payments for pensioners and altering inheritance tax rules for farmers. For many, this feels like an attack on hard-working families and vulnerable retirees. In the middle of a cost of living crisis, cutting winter fuel payments seems cruel. Meanwhile, revising inheritance tax rules could make it significantly harder for farming families to pass down their land, threatening generational livelihoods. And here's what Reeves isn't telling you: the financial crisis is far worse than she's letting on. Her political career rests on three key pillars: her supposed economic expertise, her claims of responsible spending, and her promises of honesty and transparency. But this interview, and many others, have shattered all three. The reality: this budget is the most significant tax-raising effort since 1993. And yet, before the election, Reeves reassured the public that no major tax hikes were planned beyond the £8 billion already outlined. Now, people are in shock at the scale of these increases. "This was not the budget I expected to deliver when I became Chancellor," she admitted. "I didn't anticipate any government being so reckless as to leave a £22 billion deficit. If you think things are bad now, just wait until you hear about the scandal that started it all." As the controversy spiraled, new revelations surfaced about Reeves's past, raising further doubts about her credibility. During a Good Morning Britain interview, she was confronted about allegations that she had exaggerated her professional experience. In previous interviews and official Labour documents, Reeves had claimed to have worked at the Bank of England for a decade. Official records tell a different story: she was employed there for just over 5 years. When questioned about the discrepancy, Reeves deflected: "I worked at the Bank of England in the international sector, focusing on investment and productivity. I also served as an economic secretary at the British Embassy in Washington. But the numbers don't lie." When pressed on why she exaggerated her tenure, she sidestepped the question, attempting to downplay the discrepancy. And that's not the only issue. Reports have surfaced about an expenses scandal involving Reeves during her time at Halifax Bank of Scotland. A whistleblower complaint regarding her expenses was deemed credible, but the details remain murky. Reeves insists she had no knowledge of any investigation and maintains she followed all financial rules. Labour has attempted to dismiss these concerns as administrative errors. When questioned about inaccuracies on her LinkedIn profile, Reeves's team blamed the mistake on her staff. Yet, she repeated the same claims in multiple interviews, speeches, and Labour documents. So was it truly an oversight, or a deliberate attempt to inflate her credentials? And if you thought the false CV claims were bad, just wait until you see the consequences of her economic policies. Today's financial reports show that the country is growing poorer, and many believe Reeves is the most incompetent chancellor in history. Her reputation has taken a massive hit, not just due to this interview, but because of her policy decisions and personal credibility scandals. Was this a well-balanced budget? The answer is clear: absolutely not. In fact, it may go down as one of the most damaging Labour budgets in history, one that disproportionately affects young workers and low-income families. Rachel Reeves, the UK's Shadow Chancellor, found herself in the hot seat during a live BBC interview, and her reaction was nothing short of unforgettable. The grilling, intense and unrelenting, put her under immense pressure as she struggled to maintain composure. The interviewer wasted no time in cutting through the usual political rhetoric, pressing Reeves for clear and direct answers to some of the most challenging questions about Labour's economic policies. What followed was an exchange that left viewers captivated, with many taking to social media to analyse every moment. As the questioning intensified, Reeves appeared visibly uncomfortable. She attempted to pivot away from the most difficult inquiries, using familiar political tactics to steer the conversation in a more favourable direction. However, the interviewer wasn't having any of it. Each deflection was met with another sharp follow-up, leaving Reeves with little room to maneuver. At times, she stumbled over her words, her usual confidence momentarily shaken. The tension in the studio was palpable, and for those watching, it was a rare moment of a politician being genuinely cornered. What made the exchange particularly brutal was the way in which the BBC interviewer dissected Labour's financial plans. With the UK facing economic uncertainty, questions about tax increases, spending cuts, and budget deficits are of immense concern to the public. Reeves had previously promised fiscal responsibility and economic credibility, but when pressed for specifics, she struggled to provide clear, definitive answers. Instead, she resorted to broad statements that failed to satisfy the relentless probing of the interviewer. One of the most awkward moments came when Reeves was asked a direct question about how Labour would fund its ambitious spending plans without raising taxes on the middle class. She initially tried to evade the question by pointing to Conservative mismanagement of the economy. But the interviewer was quick to push back, demanding a straight answer. After an excruciating pause, Reeves finally responded, but her answer lacked clarity, further fueling criticism that Labour's economic strategy is vague at best. As the interview progressed, the frustration on Reeves' face became increasingly evident. At times, she let out nervous chuckles, an involuntary reaction that only made the exchange more uncomfortable to watch. Her body language told a story of its own, crossed arms, shifting in her seat, and forced smiles as she tried to regain control of the conversation. But the interviewer's persistence left little opportunity for her to recover. The reaction to the interview was swift. Social media erupted with clips of the most intense moments, with some praising the BBC for holding politicians accountable, while others sympathized with Reeves for being subjected to such a relentless line of questioning. Critics accused her of dodging key issues, while supporters argued that no politician, regardless of party affiliation, could have emerged unscathed from such an intense grilling. Ultimately, the interview served as a stark reminder of the scrutiny politicians face, particularly in an era where public trust in government is fragile. Whether Reeves' response will have lasting consequences remains to be seen, but one thing is certain: her reaction, caught on live TV, will not be forgotten anytime soon.